bodhicitta prayer, and then we'll do a short reflection meditation to set our motivation as well as to begin our investigation of this topic for today. So I think most of you are familiar with this prayer. We're essentially putting forward two ideas with it. The first two lines pertaining to our finding our true refuge and safe direction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, particularly the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha that we're following. And then in the last two lines, that motivation of bodhicitta that we're going to meditate on, the idea we're here with the aim of benefiting all beings and the secondary aim of becoming enlightened so we can do that. So let's go ahead and recite this. We'll do it in English today, just 3 times. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So, as I said, we'll do a short meditation. It's always nice to spend a little bit of time in quiet reflection before we begin. Focusing the mind on the breath for the first few minutes. Breath is a good object to work with because we're breathing all the time, so we don't have to create an object. We just simply bring our awareness to the breath. If you have a technique that you already use with the breath, you can use that. If not, I'll suggest tuning into the sensation around the area of the nostrils where we feel the air coming in and out as we inhale, as we exhale. And just trying to keep your awareness there. This is just an exercise in maintaining that kind of mindful concentration on the breath. But if you do find that the mind has wandered, then you can let go of whatever it was that distracted you and then just gently return to the breath. So, again, we'll do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I will come in and I will lead you in a short reflection to begin, again, our investigation of dealing with difficult people, situations, as well as to set our motivation for our time together today. So, we can begin the meditation now. So let's begin by taking a look at difficult situations we've encountered in the past and not trying to recreate the emotions that were experienced at that time. Rather, we're just going to get a general feeling for how we tend to deal with difficult people or difficult situations. So just take a moment to reflect back on your past. Might be something in the recent past or further back, just a situation you found yourself in, and perhaps dealing with someone who was rather difficult. And just try to, again, not necessarily recreate all the emotional content of that, rather just to observe it, to reflect on what it was that went through your mind at that time. How do you normally react to difficult people? What are the patterns that play out for you in terms of how you deal with them, how you work with them? And just do a minute or two just analyzing from your own experience how you tend to deal with the unwanted. And perhaps in your investigation, you found that you do have some skill in working with people who are difficult. But if you found that perhaps you need additional assistance, then maybe begin with that level of motivation for today. To be here to try to have more skills and abilities whenever we're confronting things that are challenging for us, and whether they be people in our lives or just general situations we encounter, the state of our world today, so many things that can be difficult and challenging for us. That's perfectly fine to start with that level of motivation, wanting to be here, to work on taming your own mind, having a better ability in the face of whatever you have to confront. But because we live in a world of interconnection, we also want to be here for the benefit of others as we work on and develop our own abilities and skills. We, of course, cease harming others. That's a wonderful motivation to be here with as well, to not want to harm others through our actions. But wouldn't it be also incredibly wonderful if we could also benefit others and bringing them to their deeper peace that they seek, helping them to be able to deal with difficulties, challenges in more constructive ways. So we want to be here with this motivation that encompasses ourselves and the work we need to do on ourselves, and also the desire to be able to benefit others through this work. And of course, this is embedded in the mind of bodhicitta, the wish to develop ourselves to the greatest degree, to remove all that obscures our own deepest potential, and by attaining that potential, to actually be able to benefit others perfectly. And we try to hold that most far reaching motivation as best as we can, so the time we have together today, this very precious time, becomes the cause for unbelievable results, the welfare of ourselves and all sentient beings. And you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin our discussion of this topic. So I want to thank Manoshi and the folks there at Lama Yeshe Ling for inviting me to talk on this topic. It's, of course, one that's always relevant and has been relevant throughout the history of humankind, certainly. Um, Essentially, what we're going to be talking about is revolving around this practice of Lojong and a particular practice within Lojong. Lojong is two Tibetan words, lo meaning mind or thoughts, and then Jong having the connotation of transformation, training, cultivation, this idea that we can work on our minds. Of course, everything the Buddha taught is essentially mind training, is working with our minds. But we're more specifically looking at the teachings that are directed at this idea of whenever we have anything that is challenging, difficult, adverse situations, what have you, that we are able to transform that into our spiritual practice, rather than, of course, it becoming a cause for more consternation, more difficulty, more anger, what have you. So, in introducing this, I'm actually going to use an example that doesn't have necessarily that much to do with Buddhism that I can tell, but it nonetheless shows how some people have, through their own abilities and skills, been able to confront those things that are really difficult, things that are really challenging for them. And I'm going to share the story here. I'm going to put on a slide of a gentleman who I don't know. I've heard his story. Some of you have heard his story, and there is even a film, a documentary on him called Accidental Courtesy, Daryl Davis, Race and America. And of course, racism in America is really a prominent thing. I don't know how much it is in Canada, but Daryl Davis obviously is an African American man, and he's holding in his hands there the robes of the KKK. Uh, Many of you know the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. This is not, again, just it's a American phenomenon, but obviously racism runs around our world. I want to tell you a little bit about his story because I think he's an excellent example of somebody who's able to kind of put himself in the face of those who most of us, again, wouldn't even necessarily have the courage to do this, right? To be with people who are opposed to us just on the basis of the color of our skin. But this is his story. He says Daryl Davis was once an aspiring and successful musician. He had played with Chuck Berry, B.B. King, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Muddy Waters. However, his true claim to fame, the legacy he has forged, came in a very different way. He went out of his way to befriend KKK Grand Wizard Roger Kelly. He spent years building trust between them and laying the foundation of what became a friendship. They broke bread at each other's tables. They welcomed each other into their homes. Davis even went as far as attending Klan rallies as a guest of Kelly. And these Klan rallies are these huge gatherings of people. And this, organization still exists in the United States. Don't think that this is something of like the 1800s or even 1900s. Here we are, 2025, and this organization is still around. Goes on to say, most importantly, Davis cultivated an atmosphere of listening. He didn't hate Kelly because Kelly hated him. Instead, he listened to Roger Kelly. And eventually, Kelly started listening to him. This led to the two realizing they had far more in common than not. In the end, Kelly denounced his ties to the KKK. So much so, he handed his hood and robe to Daryl Davis. I don't know if that's actually Roger Kelly's hood and robe in the picture that I showed you, but nonetheless, he was able to collect many of these. It says in total, he's seen over 200 Klan members walk away from the KKK and hand over their robes and hoods to Daryl. Daryl Davis is a world changer, replacing hate with love because love conquers hate every time. Which, when I first read that, it reminded me of the saying from the Dhammapada of the Buddha, where essentially it's in the very first section of it, where he talks about how hatred is never overcome by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal truth, the Buddha says. And of course, we've lost touch with that truth in our culture, and it's normal because, again, this is the nature of our existence. We have a lot of hatred, a lot of anger, animosity that seems to just, again, be a natural response to things, a natural way of working with things, but it doesn't have to be. And of course, when we hear stories like that, why I chose a story like that rather than like a story of the Buddha or a story of the Dalai Lama or something, because sometimes we tend to think that those beings are very special cases, right? Well, Daryl Davis is a special case too, don't get me wrong, but he is an ordinary person just like us, really, making some decisions in his life about how to work with difficult people, those people who once more would rather lynch him and, burn his body as opposed to sit down and talk to him about race, about, issues that are important to them and so on. So people can build those sorts of bridges. One thing I'm going to do, maybe if I've got time at the end, is bring a little bit of what I taught on in San Francisco just before our election here in the U.S. In 2000. 24 last year, where the course was called Bridging Our Differences. And I think there's a lot of similarities between what I'm going to talk about today and that whole topic. We've gotten to a point, at least again, it's in our country, I'm sure it's there in Canada as well, where there's a lot of divisiveness, a lot of people on two different sides of the fence, or maybe three or four different sides of the fence, and a lot of people not listening to each other, people not being able to sit down with each other, get to know each other. And of course, the main block to that is because we have some resistance to what is difficult for us. We have a desire to kind of run away from those sorts of things. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in his book Transforming Problems into Happiness, he talks about two main thoughts that we have to cultivate if we're going to engage in this type of practice, if we're going to embrace the unwanted, we're going to actually, work with those difficult people and situations. The first is we have to stop having this aversion to experiencing suffering or difficulty. That's a hard one, right? Most people want to pull away, again, from anything that appears threatening, anything that is not kind of in line with what we are expecting, in line with what we want. That's again, this is the idea of what we're initially having to confront is that if we don't have that ability to just simply embrace that a bit, to be able to come forward and say, okay, I'm going to experience this. I'm going to go through some difficulty, some challenges. Now, I do want to point out when I'm getting into all of this topic, I'm not saying that we should necessarily put ourselves in danger. I think we do have to be careful. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was asked once, if there's somebody, charging at you with a weapon or something, what should you do? And he says, run away. I don't think we have to be kind of martyrs for the cause in a sense and just rush into anything that is dangerous and difficult and potentially lose our lives for the sake of just trying to be with something that is challenging. But we all have enough challenging things in our lives without those sorts of situations. But certainly be careful. We're not talking about putting ourselves in danger. Rather, we're just talking about trying to develop a little bit more curiosity, a little bit more interest in what is going on, and not being so averse to experience difficulties, suffering, challenges. That's the initial thing Rinpoche pointed out. By the way, that comes from a text that he was teaching on in that book, but it's an important point. We do have that resistance to suffering. The second one is that we have to eventually learn to like our problems and difficulties, which is a whole nother level of practice, right? That's the title of today's talk, right? Embracing the unwanted. Those two words don't seem to go together, right? Unwanted, embracing. We have to learn to like having these difficult people and situations in our lives, which is again, that's a much deeper level of practice. Lama Zopa Rinpoche in his book says we should eventually learn to like our problems in the same way that we like ice cream or music, whatever. Choose whatever it is your object of like comfort, something you really enjoy. Well, do you think about your problems, the difficult people in that way right now? Well, probably not, right? That's because we haven't developed the skills and abilities to do all of this. And today we're going to look at some of that and how we might change our minds and be able to at least get the first one done, not have so much resistance to being in those situations. But secondly, if we can develop over time the ability to embrace our problems, our difficulties, well, then I think we have, good room to grow and learn from those situations. So what is the root of the understanding of all of this? Because really, you're going to go into some of these techniques for doing this, but it really boils down to the fact that everything that we experience, difficult people, pleasant people, whatever the case might be, those are all a ripening of our past actions. And I know this gets into kind of deep end territory in some regard, because the teachings on karma, this law of cause and effect that the Buddha set out, it's not the Buddha's determining this. This is simply the Buddha observing this. That we are essentially involved in a process whereby we create what we experience. Doesn't mean we're horrible people if we have a lot of bad, negative things in our lives. It just means we've made some bad decisions in the past. We've followed these, tendencies to respond to things with anger and so on. But we can do better. And this is this whole idea that I first came across the way that of approaching karma in this way from a book by Pema Chodron called Start Where You Are. Some of you perhaps have read that. I'm going to share a few quotes from that on the screen. I'm not doing a lot of sharing on screen today, but I at least want to have some things. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to first start with this. I forgot that I moved this up to the front. Let me start with this. This is a verse from the mind training text by Geshe Langri Tangpa, the 8 verses of thought transformation. This is verse 4, which is kind of the beginning in that text, a very short text about how we work with these difficult situations. So he says there, whenever I see sentient beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by negative actions and heavy suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear as if I had found a precious treasure. This is what we're aiming for. I'm sorry, I kind of messed up on my order here, but this is kind of the goal. We want to be able to hold these beings that we encounter, these difficult situations, as being the most precious. This is a rare opportunity for us to actually engage in practice. We'll get more into that shortly. Let me go to the teachings that Venerable Pema Chodron gave in her book. It says karma is a difficult subject. But one of the reasons you are encouraged to work with what happens to you rather than blame it on others is that what happens is somehow a karmic result of things that you have done before. This kind of teaching on karma can easily be misunderstood. And this is the problem, right? We hear karma and immediately we go to places of guilt, feeling like we're horrible people because we have these negative things in our lives. And that's not the point at all. People get into a heavy duty sin and guilt trip, she says, feeling that if things are going wrong, that means they did something bad and they're being punished. That's not the idea at all. The idea of karma is that you continually get the teachings that you need in order to open your heart. Let me pause it here because this was the phrase that really got me, this last sentence when I first read this. You continually get the teachings that you need in order to open your heart. If we look at everything that is happening to us initially from that point of view, because this is again to be able to acknowledge that first thing that Rinpoche said, that we have to not have this resistance to experiencing that. If we actually go, okay, this is my karma ripening into something that is giving me kind of the lessons I need to learn right now. That will help me to open my heart, help me to deepen my wisdom, my understanding, rather than pushing it out and saying this has nothing to do with my well-being or happiness or anything. It's rather, I want to embrace that, excuse me, bring that forward and kind of see what it has to teach me. Again, this is a very different way of talking about karma. Excuse me just a second. I need to get my throat moistened. Excuse me. We've got allergies, pollen in the air here in New Mexico as well now that it's warming up. Um, so essentially, what we're doing here with this first one is we're actually looking at everything from that kind of point of view. With that lens on, we're going to say, okay, what does this have to teach me? What is this actually going to give me an opportunity to, work with, to deepen my practice, to actually increase my positive qualities, as Pema Chodron says, to open my heart? Because that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today is how do I actually use this encounter with someone who is difficult as an opportunity to deepen my compassion and love for them and for all beings. So that's a big one. Let's go back to what she says. She carries on just a little bit longer. I've got a few more passages from her. To the degree that you didn't understand in the past how to stop protecting your soft spot, how to stop armoring your heart, you're given this gift of teachings in the form of your life to give you everything you need to learn how to open further. I think that may actually be the last part of the quote. Yeah, let me get it off screen here. Don't necessarily want to go into that yet. Some verses from Shantideva. But the idea here is that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, apparently, who was Pema Chodron's teacher, used to talk about this thing of the soft spot. I kind of think of it as the place where we're kind of vulnerable. When we get in touch with all of these kind of investigative things, we're looking at ourselves more closely. We're trying to get in touch with the deeper places of awareness, of being. Well, this is a difficult place to be. And certainly when we are confronted with someone who is challenging for us, it causes us to tighten around that soft spot, to armor it in some degree, to cover it with what will protect it. There's a lot of talk in even Western psychology around vulnerability. Brene Brown, who you may have heard of, does a lot of talks around kind of this being the greatest source of our courage, is the place of vulnerability. And that's the whole idea again of this first point that Rinpoche was stressing. We need to be able to be somewhat vulnerable, to be in that place where we're going to say, okay, I'll accept that there is hurt, pain involved in that situation. But this is a great place of learning. This is actually a place where I can learn to open my heart more, to not be so armored, to not be so protective, because all of that is keeping us from developing. It's keeping us from actually moving forward. One friend of mine, and I certainly have heard this in many other places, but we were talking one day and he says, in my experience, I don't ever grow unless I'm out of my comfort zone. And this is so true, right? We tend to like to be in our comfort zone. Comfort zone feels good. It's warm and fuzzy and soft and, delicious. But when we don't grow in our comfort zone, generally, we just kind of become, very stuck in our rigid ways of being. We don't really have an ability to change and develop until we are kind of outside of that a bit, until we have that place of vulnerability exposed to some degree. And we can work with looking at ourselves more honestly and seeing where we do need to move in a different direction, where we do need to develop greater skills and abilities. So this is the idea behind what this framing of our situations, so that if what I am experiencing is a cause of my past actions, again, it doesn't make me a horrible person, doesn't make me, somehow, this exception of just an outrageously horrible uh, person who engaged in all this negative karma and now is having to experience this result. That's not the point of it at all. It's like I created this in the past. Who knows what the situations were? Who knows why that all happened in a sense? But nonetheless, why it's coming to fruition is to give me the opportunity to deepen my understanding, to actually change things, to change my mind, of course, which is what the whole point of the Buddhist teachings is, to lessen those negative tendencies and to increase the positive ones. So again, the mind training teachings, the Lojong teachings that we're going to be examining as part of today are all tools to help us to do that and to eventually get to that second point that Rinpoche taught about, where we can actually like and embrace our problems and difficulties. So, as I said, this is working with our minds. And I do want to share these few verses from Master Shantideva before I go into more detail on these practices of Lojong. But in Master Shantideva's text, which many of you are familiar with, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, chapter 6 is where he talks about developing patience, which is probably the most appropriate chapter in regard to what we're talking about today. But in chapter 5, he spends some time talking about how everything we do in terms of our practice is not about changing the external world, it's about changing the internal world. This is a tendency that we have that sometimes gets us in problems. Yeah, I had you do that reflection as part of our meditation today, right? About when you do have difficult situations. What is your kind of default mode? What is it that you do? I mean, do we spend a lot of time trying to fix the other person or the outside situation? And I'm not saying that that is always a bad thing. Even in that sixth chapter of Shantideva's text, he does say, if it's something you can do something about, well, then don't get all bent out of shape, do something about it. That is, a valid response to some degree. But that tendency that we have to fix things on the outside is also sometimes an obstacle to working on the inside. We have to be able to change our minds. And then, even if we do change our minds and focus on that side of it and not so much on the external, what we need to do to fix the external might become much clearer, might become something that is more evident on the basis of changing our minds. So, the initial workshop is always our minds. Is always what we are doing with our minds. And so I want to share the few verses where he does talk about developing patience, but in the context of that fifth chapter, where he speaks to what we have to do to work on our minds. He says, harmful beings are everywhere, like space itself. Again, this is the main topic for today, right? All these harmful beings that we have no shortage of. They're around there, and we certainly have them in our lives. Impossible it is that all should be suppressed. This is not the answer, right? That I'm going to get rid of all the harmful people, vote them off the island so that I don't have to deal with them. But let this angry mind alone be overthrown, and it's as though all foes had been subdued. This is the gist of this section that he goes into, is once more, everything comes down to our minds. If we get rid of the anger, the tendency we have to react strongly, negatively to people who are difficult and harmful, well, then we essentially have gotten rid of our enemies. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say, no enemy inside, no enemy outside. Because, of course, we create an enemy through our own minds and our thoughts. Master Shantideva then goes on to say, he uses this wonderful example to cover all the earth with sheets of leather, in order to protect ourselves from everything that is sharp and harmful. Here in New Mexico, you couldn't go walking out very far in your bare feet, right? Because you would get, the cacti and all the various things that are out there, rocks, and, it's a very desert area. So again, we couldn't possibly do that, right? To kind of make the whole earth smooth so that we never have to step on anything sharp again. Where, Master Shantideva says, where could such amounts of skin, leather be found? But with the leather soles of just my shoes, it's as though I cover all the earth. So this is the idea. We're going to cover our own feet, and then we can walk wherever we want. We're going to cover our own minds, protect our own minds, and then we can be wherever we want. And that's the final conclusion he comes to. And thus, the outer course of things, I myself cannot restrain. But let me just restrain my mind, and what is left to be restrained? This is, that's the final work that we need to do. If we protect our minds, we can go wherever we want. We can be in whatever difficult situation. Now, once more, I'll go back to that warning. It doesn't mean that we should go wherever we want to do, kind of address difficult things in our world, because there are dangerous situations out there. I used to joke, and maybe not much of a joke, but the idea of when ISIS was beheading foreigners over in Syria, Iraq, those places, and they would release the videos. I mean, I never watched any of these videos, but it's not something I really want to see. But I could really like be observing them doing this and think, oh, this would be, a perfect place for my practice or whatever, and also an opportunity to maybe help them to see something different. But it doesn't mean I'm going to get on a plane and go over to Syria or Iraq and try to find these members of ISIS who are doing this and, say, oh, this is an opportunity for me and an opportunity for you to hear something different, to change your minds. Chances are it's not going to work out that way, right? I'll be the next video. They'll be chopping off my head. I'm just putting that out there again that we have to be careful. We're not like going to run towards danger and difficulty necessarily, but there are people certainly who can do that. I think Daryl Davis is a perfect example, right? What caused him in the first place to sit down with somebody who holds such beliefs, racist beliefs, and say, "I'm happy to sit down as a black man and speak to you about who you are and your family and get to know you and to do that reciprocally and what have you." I mean, that's a huge thing, right? There is some danger involved in that. Again, the idea is here is that if you don't change your mind, if you don't work on deepening your own skills and abilities, then fixing the external situation, going out to confront that and deal with that, is usually going to be pretty futile. We have to work with changing our minds first, and then we can be more skilled at how we actually work with things. Now, I don't know Daryl Davis and all of his practices, but I'm assuming he's got some sort of grounding in some deeper understanding of his heart, of his soft spot, if you will, and isn't so armored and is therefore able to do this. So again, in Buddhism, we look at many techniques for being able to do this. As I said in the Lojong teachings, this is one of the main points. I think I taught for all of you many, many years ago on the 7-point mind training, and I think you probably have had other teachings from other teachers on that wonderful text. But I think it's the third point of that text where he talks about transforming these adverse circumstances, situations, into our practice. So what's the first thing that we would do? And I'm going to be referring to a short text by Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of our tradition, where he goes into some of the main teachings that we can apply. But the initial thing is, first of all, to recognize that what we are experiencing is essentially evidence of the nature of our existence. Now, in Buddhism, we use this term samsara. Most of you are familiar with it. I know it's the name of a perfume too, but it's not. In the context we're going to talk about, we're talking about samsara being this state of cyclic existence. The essence of it is that the Buddha in his very first teaching said that we are in this kind of unsatisfactory state that involves us going from life to life under the control of our karma, which we've already talked about a little bit today, the actions we do that create our experiences. But those actions don't come from nowhere, they come from our minds. So the other factor that is behind all of it is our delusions. So essentially, we are involved in this process. We have been involved in this process since beginningless time. We are continuing simply to create patterns that play out in terms of these unfavorable experiences. So the reality is that once more, we've already got that framework that what is happening in terms of that difficult person or difficult situation is a ripening of my own past actions. Well, essentially, this is once more evidence of what we are involved in. Why should I be surprised when I have difficult people in my life? When I've created the causes for those things in the past, and I will continue to create them and so on, as long as I don't change my mind. I shouldn't be so surprised. Rather, I should be once more accepting that this is the nature of existence, that it is only natural for us to have challenging things in our lives, to experience illness, to experience, people who berate us, to experience all the various things that are part of just existence. And instead of having the mind that is going to react negatively to them, I want to embrace them with the understanding of renunciation. So the first way we embrace the unwanted is to kind of channel that energy into our desire to be free of that once and for all. Again, it's not going to, there is an element of it still being somewhat self centered. We're going to talk more about how we develop the skills and abilities to work with others and to think about others at that time. But it does start with our own wish for us to be free of that. And when we do confront things that are difficult, it's not a pleasant situation, right? It's definitely part of the suffering nature of samsara, and we can learn to not have that resistance and maybe to eventually like our problems. But it doesn't mean that the goal of being free of all of our suffering is gone. That's the first major kind of motivation that the Buddha taught, that every one of us should aspire to be completely out of the situation that we're in, to transcend samsara and attain the state of nirvana, which are essentially two different states of mind, if you will. They embody our experiences, but we go from our being under the control of all these factors in samsara to being free of them in the state of nirvana, to attaining the peace that we are seeking, essentially, by all of our actions, uh, to have that freedom from things being difficult, challenging, what have you. So this is the first way that we can transform it, is to really recognize that this is an opportunity for us to deepen our renunciation. This mind of renunciation, it's a little strange in English, in the English usage of it. We kind of have this vision of like removing ourselves to some isolated place and wearing, sackcloth and eating nettles or something. I mean, and there are beings who do that. Milarepa, is a perfect example, this wonderful Tibetan saint who did, many ascetic practices as part of his way of moving towards achieving these states and so on. But nonetheless, this isn't what we're really talking about as once more an external change. We're talking about an internal shift where we move away from our reliance upon those things that we know are not going to bring us the result we seek, and we move towards those things that will bring us that result, which once more is working with the teachings of the Buddha to continue to develop our minds, to deepen our understanding, and to eventually attain our own freedom, our liberation through the state of nirvana, and then to go beyond that to attaining Buddhahood. But we're not talking again about kind of um, uh, doing these more habitual things that have gotten us in the same situation before. That's the definition of insanity, right? Doing things over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we've been insane essentially since beginningless time, continuing to do the things that we think will bring us some measure of happiness. We have to move away from that. The mind of renunciation says, I'm going to emerge from that nonsense into this state of peace, this state of liberation. So that's an initial way that we can work with this that Lama Tsongkhapa recommends, is really to understand that what we are experiencing in that difficult person or difficult situation is, as I said, evidence of samsara. So therefore, we use it as a platform for deepening our wish to kind of transcend that, to move beyond that. The second thing that he talks about is for diminishing our pride. Now, again, pride is one of the root delusions in the way that it's taught, root afflictions in the traditional teachings. I don't know if you've all gone through Lorik with Geshe-la there, Geshe Sonam, but Lorik is this wonderful study of minds and mental factors. It's kind of getting in, and I just did a course on this over a number of weeks that's called Getting to Know Your Own Mind. And the idea, Venerable Rabina often talks about how like we have all these kind of crazy roommates that are hanging out with us in our minds, and we need to know who's there. We need need to know the voice of attachment, and the voice of anger, and the voice of more positive things like non-harmfulness and what have you. We need to kind of be attentive to all of this so we understand what's going on in terms of our mental landscape. But pride is, in that traditional way, set out as one of the six root afflictions, the major things that are problematic for us in our spiritual path. Well, what happens when we have someone difficult or a difficult situation in our lives? Almost the most immediate thought we have, and maybe in your own investigation, you saw that that was the case, was this sense of this shouldn't be happening to me, right? Does everyone have that thought at some point? This shouldn't be happening to me. Well, it's a bit of hubris, right? To think that this shouldn't be happening to me. I mean, what makes us so special that we're not prone to having problems or difficult people in our lives? You know, again, over time, if you do practice and engage wholeheartedly in the Buddha's teachings, these situations will lessen. They do become more rare. Remember that verse that I put on from the 8 verses? It talked about, I shall hold such rare ones dear as if I had found a precious treasure. Well, maybe for most of us, they're not that rare. Maybe we do have, difficult people popping in our lives every day. Maybe some of us even live with difficult people. Who knows? We have a lot of difficult people sometimes in our families or in, our workplace or what have you. But the idea is that we should, first of all, check that thought of that's coming from this feeling of pride. Why is this happening to me? There was even a book that was written some years ago. I haven't read it because I'm not sure that I mean, it'd be interesting to see the point of view when good things happen or when bad things happen to good people, right? That's when bad things happen. Like this is outrageous that bad things are happening to good people, and we carry that thought in terms of our own immediate reaction to what's going on. This difficult person comes in, and it's like this shouldn't be happening to me. That's the voice of pride. Well, pride, of course, is one of these obstacles that doesn't allow us to learn from the situation. That's why it's one of the root afflictions. Pride causes us to think of ourselves as superior, to look down on others and to think that, there's nothing that they can necessarily do for us in that regard. Maybe they can do lots of other things for us, taking care of us, serving us, what have you. But we're not really seeing them through the lens of people who can contribute to our deeper well-being, that we can actually see as teachers. Then these 8 verses of thought transformation, there's a later one where we deal with the situation of those people who are really close to us. This verse goes, it's verse 6 in the mind training verses. When beings whom I have benefited and in whom I have great trust give me terrible harm, I shall hold such rare ones dear as if I had. No, then that's the first one. I shall look upon them as my most holy guru. The idea is that we see them as like our perfect teacher. We look at them and say, these people who are actually doing something that is harmful to me, especially those whom I have benefited who are now harming me, because that happens in our lives too. They're our best teacher because they are the ones that are actually going to point things out to us of where we have that prideful resistance, where we think, again, this shouldn't be happening to me. I've benefited you, and now you're, you know, doing all this stuff that's harming me. So again, we have to check this mind of pride. When we have something happening in our lives, if that's our initial thought is that this shouldn't be happening to me, well, we have to be able to examine, are we really that good? Is there really, do we have that much positive stuff going on that we shouldn't be experiencing any problems? As I said, over time, that may be the result. But even if you look at beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and so on, they still had things manifesting in their lives. They dealt with them very differently than we do. They put out the welcome mat and said, yes, okay, stroke is happening. I'll take that. Have this problem with my gallbladder. I'll take that, whatever. But again, this is not unusual for us to have problems. And so we have to be able to get rid of that mind that is part of the resistance, the mind of pride that thinks that this shouldn't be happening to us. Now, of course, we can use other antidotes to our pride, but sometimes these are even just antidotes in and of themselves for us to simply acknowledge. Well, if we're so lofty in our own spiritual achievements, well, then why are we having these problems or difficulties in our lives? If they're there, they're evidence that we still have work to do. So again, we go on then to learn more from the situation to try to hear uh, kind of underneath the surface, what is it that we can actually take away from that situation so that we do develop and deepen our qualities rather than increasing our negative tendencies. So this is an important part of it too. The way that Lama Zopa talks, or I'm sorry, Lama Tsongkhapa talks about this is he says, pride of observing oneself and what it leads to, which is despising others, destroys many virtues and are the basis of much misconduct. So think, if it is the door for many harms, I shall overcome my pride by this suffering and come to see it as a source of renunciation, and therefore I shall eradicate pride. So it's kind of still related within the topic of renunciation, but it's the idea that I have to be able to see clearly my pride arising in response to that person who is challenging for me and diminish it because it's such a source of problems and conflict and difficulty. I don't think that Daryl Davis, going back to our wonderful example from the beginning of today, would have been able to befriend these members of the KKK if he was full of some sort of pride and indignation at, who they are and thinking himself superior to them. And we can say certainly from a cultural perspective, his view is superior to the view of the KKK, without a doubt. It is much better to be more embracing of others and to not have such hatred and to engage in violent acts towards others whose skin color is different. But nonetheless, he didn't come from that place. I don't think he wouldn't have been able to befriend others if he came from a place of pride. So pride is a major obstacle that we can see kind of an ability to overcome to some degree when we are dealing with a difficult person or difficult situation. I want to move on to maybe the ones that there are a number of other things that Lama Tsongkhapa talks about that certainly we can look at. If we go back to that understanding of karma, well, then, of course, if we have that difficult person in our lives, we can go, okay, how did I create that person in my life? What is it that it's teaching me? Well, chances are you've created difficult people in your life by being a difficult person in your life. We've all been difficult people for other people too, right? I mean, face it, I'll happily admit, I've been a thorn in someone else's side at one point or another, probably more than that. But the idea is that we create difficult people through our own being difficult people. And so this is essentially what karma is giving us in terms of that lesson. Now, karma is much more complex than that. Don't make it think like it's just this pure linear thing. I'm difficult, and then you become difficult to me, and it comes is tit for tat. I think that's more the cultural understanding we have of karma. That is not quite the whole picture. But nonetheless, that is part of it. Why do you have these experiences? Because you've done something similar in the past. So when we have that happening to us, one of the ways we can also transform it and embrace it is like, oh, this is kind of like a mirror showing me what I've done. We don't like looking in the mirror sometimes, right? Even just using it as a ordinary everyday example. And the older we get, the more we kind of refrain from looking in the mirror, perhaps. We don't want to see more wrinkles or more gray hair or, what have you. But we have to look in the mirror if we're going to confront what is not right. There was something that needs to be fixed. When we're talking about our minds, we can do something about that. Maybe our bodies we can't do quite as much about, so looking in the mirror maybe isn't such a good idea over time. But nonetheless, for our minds, this is important to have a mirror and go, okay, what is this pointing out to me about the ways that I've been belligerent and difficult and, you know, uh, uh, been confrontative with other people and what have you? We have to be able to check our own behavior. And that's a good part of the lesson that we can learn from that situation as well, is to say, okay, what do I need to change? And if you feel like you've been an absolute angel and now you've completely cleaned up and you haven't done any of these things, so you're just, only you're at peace with everyone around you and what have you. First of all, congratulations if that's the case. But if so, well, then, you still might need to clean up some past karma. You still might need to do some things to address the fact that you're still having difficult people in your life. I mean, I might point out that even the Buddha, and I don't think it was the Buddha's karma necessarily, because the Buddha wasn't fazed by it at all. But even the Buddha had, especially his cousin Devadatta, as like a thorn in his side, right? Some of you know the story of the Buddha, and he formed his monastic community, and his cousin Devadatta became a part of it. And he disliked the Buddha so much. He didn't really have this admiration and awe for the Buddha that everyone else seemed to have. And so he did things like having a wild elephant storm towards the Buddha with the aim of killing the Buddha. And, of course, the Buddha was able to divert this without any problem. But, if the Buddha has difficult people in their lives, well, chances are we've got difficult people in our lives. Ours has been created through the force of our karma. The Buddha's kind of transcended that. It was just simply, Devadatta doing his thing. Kind of maybe Devadatta was there to give us an example centuries later to be able to point to the fact that the Buddha still had these people in his life. But we all have those people that, again, are a product of our own karma. They're there because we've been the difficult person. So I'd like to point that one out because I think that's also a very important one to understand, that we have to constantly use it as a mirror. Like, okay, what ways am I challenging and difficult for others? Through my own stubbornness or through my own, unwillingness to listen to what people have to say and to grow and develop from that. That's perhaps a product of my pride. So if we have that orientation, then will be tempted to abandon those actions that have led us in that direction and cause those people to appear and manifest in our lives. And we'll be able to adopt more healthy ways of being with others, to be much humbler in the presence of others, to actually see them as, again, teachers for us, people who can help us in ways that are really important for our mental development, spiritual development. There's that second verse of the 8 verses. For some reason, I keep going to those today as I'm talking. The second verse that says, wherever I am and whoever I am with, may I always see myself as lowest among all and respectfully hold others dear and supreme from the depths of my heart. We want to kind of be able to be with others in a much humbler place and not be always thinking about, uh, again, those sort of prideful or superior thoughts. So if we actually look at everyone who's manifesting in our lives as a mirror to help us to examine our issues, having set aside our pride, we can actually pay attention to that and increase our own willingness to move in different directions. So again, there are a couple of other things he mentions, but I want to kind of move on to using what is happening with a difficult person in our lives as an opportunity to deepen our compassion, our love. This is what Pema Chodron was focusing on in that passage I read to you, was this idea of opening our hearts to others, using what is appearing before us as, again, seeing it as a product of our past actions that now has the lesson embedded in it of how do we open our hearts to people who are difficult and different from us. And again, if we look at Daryl Davis, there there had to be some deeper underwriting love and concern for those beings to be able to even put himself in the position of being so vulnerable, being so open to potentially receiving only threats and harm on the basis of trying to interact with somebody who was holding such an opposing view, right? So we have to be able to open our hearts at that time with the understanding that the being that is our difficult person, this is, I'm going to mainly focus on this. I know I included in the title kind of difficult situations, but they often involve difficult people. So focusing on the people is a good place to be. We have to understand that the person in front of us who is our difficult person is essentially just like us in terms of under the control of the same factors that we ourselves find ourselves under the control of, which once more are our karma and our delusions. Now, Master Shantideva in that 6th chapter, when he's talking about this, he uses the example of being hit by somebody with a stick, right? And Master Shantideva starts with the, kind of saying, well, you get upset at the person who hits you with the stick, but why aren't you angry with the stick? The stick is what's actually hitting your head, right? If somebody's beating you on the head with a stick, are you angry with the stick? Well, and the answer, of course, most people come up with is, well, no, not angry at the stick. The stick is being wielded by the person. And then Master Shantideva very cleverly goes on to say, well, then why aren't you angry at the delusions, at the what's in the state of mind of that person rather than the person? Because the person is being wielded by their delusions. Again, this is the understanding that we have to have with regard to any difficult person, whether we talk about the president of a country to the south of all of you in Canada, or whether we talk about your own president, or I mean, whoever it is that you find challenging for you in your life. We have to understand they are under the control of their own karma and delusions. They are engaging in behavior and actions that they don't even necessarily understand the process of all of this. They simply follow these with this idea of just their habitual reaction. They are inclined to do it things that way and don't really have even the space to understand things differently. Of course, they can understand things differently. I'm not, denying that. But in the moment when they are being difficult for us, when they are coming forward and accusing us of this or saying negative things to us about that, well, we have to understand what the source of all of that is. We tend to put all the onus on the person. I mean, His Holiness often, emphasizes that we need to be able to hold the person through the lens of compassion and loving kindness. See that what is being kind of driving them to do that, the delusions, is the real enemy. That's what we really want to abolish. And then, of course, we can also decry their actions to some degree. I mean, we can separate the person from their actions and know that, again, the actions aren't really the nature of the person. They are the nature of the delusions that are giving rise to that action. So if you have somebody hitting you with a stick, you can, say, okay, well, yes, it's not good to hit people with a stick, and let's try to, outlaw that action so that people aren't being harmed everywhere by people wielding sticks. But let's get at the real source of that, which is the delusions in their minds that cause them to hit other people with a stick. So this is the understanding for why we can have loving kindness and compassion for these beings at this time is because they are under the control of their own crazy roommates in the same way that we are under the control of ours when we react negatively to difficult people or situations in our lives. So the work we do on ourselves gives us an opportunity to understand what's happening mentally for others because it's no different. No matter, who you look at, we can see that they are under the control of their own states of mind and engaging in behavior on the basis of that. And once more, it doesn't mean we condone the behavior. I really want to emphasize this because once I do think that there are things certainly that would need to be addressed in our world. And if we just kind of sit back and go, oh, well, this is just a product of their own delusions, and I can understand it and have loving kindness and compassion, but I don't do anything to stop the harmful actions that are endangering others, well, that's a mistake. We need to be able to confront that. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his commentary on that chapter of Master Shantideva dealing with patience, he says that we do have forms of what he would call justifiable anger. Now, he's not using anger as the delusion there, he's using it as a way of responding compassionately to what's going on. Because that compassion will embrace not only the people that might be harmed by that person's actions, but also embracing that person as somebody who we don't want to be engaging in those harmful actions. That's a much fuller view of compassion that we can bring rather than what we do in our culture, which is we have compassion for the victims, the people who are kind of suffering from those difficult people, and we don't have compassion for the perpetrator, the difficult person who's doing that. You have to be able to embrace everybody in the lens of compassion because everybody's under the control of their karma and delusions. Now, we are talking in this whole session today about generating more control. When we use that phrase under the control of karma and delusions, we don't mean it's absolute because the whole point of Buddhist practice is to be in charge, to be in, the driver's seat and understand the rules of the road so that you do actually make more wise decisions about how you go about living your life. But nonetheless, for most beings, they don't even have those tools, that ability. We're really quite blessed. We should rejoice every day that we've met with teachings like the Buddha Dharma that give us the tools to work with our minds and to increase our positive qualities and diminish those negative tendencies. Most beings don't even have that. And if they go to their Western therapist, they might get some inkling of working with their minds. But most Western therapists aren't working with Buddhist principles and don't have a deeper understanding of the nature of the mind. Yeah, I'm not putting them down. They do wonderful work. Don't get me wrong. I think Western therapy is a wonderful tool that is very helpful for some level of mental health. But the Buddha taught us much deeper tools to be able to work with mental health. So again, that is something that we have to see is not available to everyone. The karma isn't there for most people to meet with these teachings. However, we have met with them. So at least apply it to ourselves as best as we can. That's once more the initial practice and most of what I already talked about today. But then begin to overlay that on others and understand that they're under the control of their karma and delusions. They're experiencing their own um, ripening of things and they don't have any tools to work with it. So that's an explanation as to why they are doing what they're doing. It's not a justification. Again, we're just simply saying that this is an explanation, that it gives me some room to be able to see that person through the lens of compassion and kindness. It's interesting. I've been involved here in Santa Fe with a group. Actually, next Saturday, a week from today, we're going to do a workshop at our center here. Myself and two other people who have been involved in what's called Nonviolent Santa Fe. Nonviolent Santa Fe, it's a part of the Nonviolent Cities Project. And it's I think a nationwide, but could be even worldwide. I don't know. It's out of an organization called Pace e Bene, which came out of the Catholic tradition, but I think it's a non-religious organization now. But they've did this project called Nonviolent Cities, and the idea is that different cities could sign up. So you could have, nonviolent Burlington or nonviolent Toronto or nonviolent Hamilton or whatever, and you could become a charter member of that organization, and you do whatever you think is appropriate for your own community to confront violence and to work with it. So what we've done here is we put together a little training. It's like a 2-hour training that's called Exploring Nonviolence. And it's very workshoppy. It has little activities and things. And we have one that's called From Another Point of View. And the essence of it is that we put a scenario in front of people of something that has happened. That's a confrontation with a difficult person. And the point of the exercise is to think of reasonable explanations for why that person might be doing what they're doing rather than our tendency, which is to tell a story ourselves about why they're doing what they're doing. We kind of make up something about who that person is and how horrible they are. And that's our explanation for why they're doing what they're doing. But they may have many other things that are going on in their lives that cause them to do that. Now, in Buddhist terms, we have the deeper roots of all of that, again, our karma and delusions. But even in the moment, what is driving somebody to do something? We don't know their whole story. There was, I think I told this the last time when I taught on this topic about a year ago in California. The story that Jack Kornfield tells about this individual who was working with MBSR. Most of you know mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's like an 8-week program where each week you get just different exercises, but the whole point with mindfulness-based stress reduction is to pay attention to what's going on in your own mind so that you have the space and awareness to not react with anger and stress and frustration and whatever. And the story is that he was at this grocery store and he was waiting in line, and it was probably a very busy time of day from what I gather, where there were many people in the line in front of him waiting to get up to the cashier. And, he's starting to get really impatient at how slow the line is going. And then he remembers, oh yeah, MBSR, I've got to be more mindful of my emotions, see how they arise, see how they dissipate, all of these techniques that are taught, not get so, don't identify with them, all of this. So he calms himself down a bit and the line keeps moving. And then he's, getting closer, but he notices that up at the front of the line, there's an older woman who has a baby and the cashier is a younger woman and the older woman's taking the baby and handing it to the cashier and the cashier's holding it up and going goo goo gaga with the baby and whatever and he's like, okay, there's all these people in line in front of me and this woman's now choosing to you know cuddle this baby that this older woman brought in. This is really annoying. Why is she doing this? He starts having his same habitual thoughts, telling a story about how rude this is for this woman to be doing this with all the people in line, right? And then he remembers his mindfulness-based stress reduction and he starts practicing a little bit of that, becomes a little more aware. So he calms his mind down. Eventually he gets to the front of the line and his mind is pretty calm at this point. And he says to the young woman there, he says, "Oh, that was a cute baby that woman brought in. You seem to like it." And she says, "Oh, you think he was cute? Oh, that's my son. And ever since my husband died 2 years ago, I've had to work 2 jobs in order to be able to support myself and him. And that's my mother who takes care of him while I'm at work, and she just brings him in so that I can see him." Right? So, once he knows the story, once he knows why people do what they do, sometimes it's a wonderful explanation like that, right? That actually it's somebody who was needing a few more precious moments with their child. And because they're at work most of the time, her mother would bring the child in to have that opportunity. So we don't know everyone else's story. In fact, there is that one phrase. Let me find that quote from. I have it in my notes here. If we could read the secret, yeah, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life suffering and sorrow enough to disarm all hostility. We kind of, again, understand that, and that's from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, where he says that essentially, if we know the whole story of why people do what they do, the hurts, the wounds that they have in their lives that lead them to various things, then, it would disarm our hostility immediately. Like this guy, if he knew that this was the child being brought in so that the mother could have a few more moments with her child rather than being so kind of self-centered and saying, oh, why is she doing this? This is so rude. This is horrible. It changes your mind completely, right? So anyway, this exercise that we do in there is all about being able to come up with kind of rational explanations, reasonable, ways of looking at it so that we can have a little more space in our minds. And I think that's an important part of this as we move into this area of talking about having compassion and loving kindness for others, is that we don't know what's all going on for that person who's doing something to us. Like if you have a difficult driver, somebody who, is being really rude on the road and honking at you and doing whatever, and possibly a road rage incident, well, we know where that goes if we actually react with more anger, because it could lead to road rage. And road rage is horrible. We have many incidents of it here in the US, and I'm sure it's everywhere. I mean, people get very annoyed in driving and what have you. But if you have kind of some ability to say, I don't know this person's story. I don't know what was happening to them prior to that incident where they're yelling at me. This could be just a matter of things being built up. Maybe they got into an argument at home before they left, and then this went wrong, and something was going wrong with their car or whatever, and then they have all these things that build up, and they explode at you. Of course, we can say, yeah, that's my karma to have that type of experience, but it doesn't really have an explanation that revolves around you. We tend to think everything revolves around us. Well, why? Once more, we have that thought, why are they doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? If we can think about the other person, have a little more space for some compassion, some understanding, even the possibility that what's going on for them might be really quite challenging in the moment, then I think we can have, again, better room for compassion and love. Lama Tsongkhapa, in his advice, does emphasize this practice of Tonglen that I'm going to talk about really briefly. I don't want to go into too much teaching on it. Most of you have had teachings on Tonglen, but it's a kind of a key part of the Lojong teachings. Again, Lojong mind training is this overall kind of corpus of teachings that helps us to work with whatever we meet, to use it as an opportunity to practice the path. And so, whenever we have something happening to us, and especially a difficult person manifesting in our lives, we can use them as an object for our practice of Tonglen. And you can even do it on the spot if you're familiar with it, if you actually have some practice with it on the cushion. But Tong Len, these two words, Tong means to give and Len means to take. We're done kind of do them in the opposite order. We start with taking, with the Len part of it, and then we do the giving, the Tong part of it. Taking isn't how we normally do. We take what we want for ourselves and then we give away what we don't want to others. The idea here is that we take the suffering that others have and we think about bringing that on ourselves and we give away what we have that brings us happiness. It's kind of the opposite of what our normal habitual response is to actually look at it from the point of view of how do I increase my compassion for others by taking away their suffering? And how do I increase my loving kindness for them by wanting to give them what brings me happiness? And then Pema Chodron, in her teachings on Tonglen, she teaches extensively on it. She says that it all boils down to willingness. Do we have the willingness to go to that place? Because this is a place of vulnerability. And this whole talk today is about being in a more vulnerable spot where we can actually open to the idea of what would it be like to take on the suffering of another being. So when we have somebody difficult manifesting in our lives, chances are they've got a disturbed mind. They've got something going on for them that is not so pleasant. We don't know, as I was saying, we might have some curiosity, but at least a willingness to say, I don't know what's happening for this person. I don't have any idea why they are in the state that they're in. But it must be coming from some level of their own tortured minds that are increasing their tendency to do things that are, difficult for other people. So I begin to generate thoughts of compassion towards them. How wonderful it would be if they were free in this moment from what is plaguing them, what is suffering them. May they be free from that. And then even this kind of initial thought that is the bodhisattva attitude, I myself will do that for them. I will take away their suffering. I will take away their afflicted mind right now. Now, again, will it actually result in that person being free of that? Most likely not. But it changes our own heart so that we are actually looking at that person as an object of compassion in that moment. Once more, you have to do the training on this. There's that phrase I came across in some of my nonviolence reading. There's a book called Resisting. Can't think of the name of the book at the moment now. Hmm. Anyway, the idea is in that book, he has this quote from Archilochus, a Greek philosopher, who said, "We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." So the idea here is that you can't just say, okay, the next time I meet somebody who's difficult, I'm going to be able to practice Tonglen in the space of that and think about removing their suffering. If you haven't done the training, it doesn't matter what you expect to do or what your aspirations are. We have to be able to engage in all of these different techniques on the cushion and in the security and safety of our own home. And then we have the tools when we meet those difficult people to actually do something different. And this one, I want to point that out in particular because don't think that Tonglen is something you can do on the spot without some kind of prior training. But if you can actually once more look at that person and say, whatever's going on for them, whatever is plaguing their mind at this time, whatever sufferings they have in their lives that are causing them to be difficult for me, may they be free of that. And I myself will take that away from them. Then, with that mind that aspires to do that, you visualize taking their suffering onto yourself. Now, in our tradition, and this isn't necessarily set out in some other teachings, especially Pema Chodron, she doesn't talk about this, but we think about that we're trying to take all of that and place it on the mind of self-cherishing, the mind of self-centeredness. That's what's driving so much of our negative karma. That's what's causing us to have unfavorable, difficult people in our lives, is the fact that we have been driven by our own self-centeredness to only think about ourselves. So we kind of want to take all of that in and place it on the mind of self-cherishing and cause it to be destroyed. You can do this very gradually, as I tend to recommend people to do, or you can do it very quickly and just like bring it all in and have it completely demolish your mind of self-cherishing. You can do this with a visualization, thinking that your mind of self-cherishing is like a rocket, your heart, and you're bringing that in to kind of pulverize it. And then once you're free of that, then you can turn your mind towards the giving side of it. You can say, now I'm going to give what I have to this being to place them in happiness. And you can cultivate thoughts of loving kindness in a similar way. How wonderful it would be if in this moment, instead of being disgruntled and whatever is going on for them that's causing them to be difficult, may they have the causes of happiness instead. May they have a happy mind. May they be at peace and contented. You kind of generate those sorts of thoughts. And then you think eventually get to that place like the bodhisattvas do of saying, and I will do this for them. I will actually place them in happiness. And then you visualize giving what you have that brings you happiness to that being in front of you. Now, the visualization here, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says we should think at that point our whole body becomes like a wish granting jewel. It's one of the things that's alluded to, and even in the Lojong teachings, that we see others as being wish granting for us, but we want to be here wish granting for others. We want to have this view that we are like we have the ability to transform whatever we have that brings us happiness into the causes of happiness for that being in front of us. And so we begin to send kind of I use the idea of if we're going to have this jewel, well, let's kind of infuse the jewel with white or multicolored light, whatever works for you. You can visualize it in whatever way you wish. But all of what we have that brings us happiness, all of our good karma, all of our merit, all of our resources that we have, the money in our bank, all the possessions that we have, even our own bodies, all of this transforms into brilliant light that we're going to send out to that being. Give it to them so it can become the causes for their happiness. And again, we can do this in a very gradual way where we send out more and more light. And each time that being in front of us becomes happier, happier. Or we can do it in one fell swoop. And maybe again, if we're on the spot, it might be easier to do it in one fell swoop to say, I'm going to give you everything I have so you can be the happiest being in the world. Develop the complete blissful state. Now, again, does that change the person in front of you? It may. I'm not saying that it can, sometimes it might have some effect because you're choosing to look at them through the eyes of compassion and loving kindness. But nonetheless, the most important thing is it's changed our heart because we are not going to be confronting them and doing things that are difficult in the face of what they have done that's difficult towards us. Instead, we're going to be embracing them with those thoughts. So this is the point of it, is that we're always, again, concerned about the other person. It's not that we don't care whether they experience peace or not. We absolutely do. But the reality is that we probably can't change that person as much in the moment as we can change our own minds. That's just the reality of it. The Buddha never said, the way to attain peace in our world is to change everyone else. The Buddha said the way to achieve peace in the world is to get peace in your own heart. So what His Holiness often speaks to, he says, outer disarmament only comes about through inner disarmament. We have to be able to disarm ourselves, to actually reduce our negative tendencies and to be able to then, act differently in our world. So these are the Buddhist tools that probably haven't done justice to all of these in the way that ideally I would like to. But so what we've talked about, just to confirm, again, the first thought, of course, whenever you have a difficult person in your life is like, okay, this is my difficult person. I've created this through the force of my own actions. So what can I learn from this situation? I go on to look at kind of the initial thoughts that are really about examining my own situation. This is samsara. I should kind of use this as fuel for my developing the mind of renunciation. Also diminish my pride so that I don't have that as an obstacle and I can actually learn from the situation. And then thirdly, to see that if this is my karmic creation, well, then essentially I have to be more attentive to the karmas that have created it and diminish those, purify those, and engage in the opposite. So all the kind of lessons around karma. And then when I think about others, when I kind of take the viewpoint of the other person who's there, that difficult person in front of me, that's where I engage in these practices of deepening my compassion and love for beings. Because every being you meet is an opportunity to do that. Every single being is an opportunity to do that. We like to have this mind of may all beings be happy and may all beings be free from suffering. But we can't generate kind of that genuinely unless that person in front of us is an object of that same thought, you know. And that is the challenging part, right? Because they are not doing things that cause us to think of them in warm, fuzzy ways. They're being the opposite. So we have to be able to kind of extend ourselves, stretch ourselves to be able to work with them in that moment and generate some thoughts of loving kindness and compassion. Let me stop for questions. I don't know that I'm going to have time to share much more in terms of some of these other more secular approaches to things, but know that there's a lot out there, and you really can find. Manoshi and I had a little interchange around nonviolent communication, which I have to admit I haven't studied so much. We use some elements of it in the nonviolence training that we do, the Exploring Nonviolence workshop. And there's some real useful things there in terms of being able to look at our minds and how we do communicate with others, because that's what it often is revolving around. When we do have difficult people in our lives, we have to communicate in some way. Some of it's going to be verbal, perhaps things we say, but some of it is also just how we are taking that situation in and how we even communicate with our body language and what have you. So those are some important tools that are out there, but I do want to see if there are any questions before I kind of tackle that. Okay. Yes, Daphne, please, if you can unmute.
Hi. Thank
Hi.
you very much for this wonderful talk. It's a lot of
You're
food
welcome.
for thought.
Good, good, good.
I was thinking, what if you're like, for example, a parent or you're responsible for another person who is not like young or not capable of
Hmm.
understanding? difficult people, and the
Mhm.
difficult person causes problems for your child, for example.
Mhm.
That makes it the whole more difficult. What do you tell the child? I mean, I can handle myself, I can do all the techniques and be reasonable and
Right.
not have pride, but how do you deal with that?
Well, I think again, I wish I had experience raising children. I didn't raise children in this life, maybe
Neither
my
did I.
maybe in my next lifetime. But I think when you're dealing with children, I think you could probably still do a bit of that kind of increasing their empathy and their understanding of another person. To maybe do an exercise that's similar to the one I mentioned, like to sit them down and say, well, I know that what that person said or did was really harmful for you. Because I mean, certainly children experience it in bullying
Yeah,
behaviors in schools, right? Where people are,
exactly.
and
Bullying and all that. Yeah.
and to really say, okay, well, I know that that was hurtful for you. Kind of acknowledge that, have some empathy for your child who's
Hmm.
the experiencing that. But then to say, but maybe we can talk a little bit about what might have led that person to do those things. So we have kind of another understanding. And I think children are quite capable of really being able to see that, yes, there might be some disturbing states of mind on the part of that person who's engaging in the bullying that are
Yeah.
causing them to do that. But, to not to try to diffuse it to some degree by having some level of awareness of what might be involved in the whole picture, as opposed to the tendency, once more, that we have of isolating ourselves and being solely self-centered on ourselves, our harm
Yeah.
that's been caused to us, our emotions, our feelings, what have you, and to not be open to the reality that something else is going on for that other person. And so I think children are actually quite capable of that. I wouldn't talk to a child about karma,
No,
necessarily.
exactly.
I mean, some children are raised in Buddhist families where that is part of the understanding. I think the challenge in talking about karma with children in our culture is that they begin to hold to that perspective, and then that's very contrary to the people that they interact with, the other children that they're around, usually.
That's true. Yeah.
So that then they end up getting isolated more, perhaps
Yes.
because their thoughts are very different than other
Yeah.
children's thoughts, and it becomes kind of problematic. But if there's an opening for at least some understanding, that what's going on, that this person doing this behavior can be at least a lesson in what not to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
for children to kind of see, okay, do you want to be like that person? Do you want to bully in the face of their bullying? Well,
No.
no, you don't want to bully the kid who's lower than you because they're bullying you because they're
Yeah,
seeing as you as
exactly.
lower and what have you. And we don't want to kind of exacerbate that behavior.
No.
So I think a child can understand maybe both of those things, that what's being exhibited to them in that behavior is not something they want to emulate, and
No.
also that there might be something else going on for that child to maybe look at,
Yeah.
just the possibilities. They don't have to know,
No.
but if they do want to interact with that child, I mean, they might have that kind of curiosity. Well, what's going on for that child? Why are they there's that phrase, I think it comes from Alcoholics Anonymous, hurt people hurt people. The idea is that people who
It's
are
true.
hurt are
Yeah,
the ones that hurt people.
that's so
Oftentimes, what's
true.
going on with someone who's bullying, someone
Yeah.
who's doing things that are difficult for other people, is that they themselves are hurt. They
Yeah.
themselves have wounds and what have you that are pretty deep, and that's an expression of that towards others.
Yeah.
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 So again, maybe children can have some understanding of that and might be able to develop a little bit of compassion or at least some space around people who do that.
Okay.
But
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you for that
Yeah,
question,
thanks.
Daphne. Yeah. Yeah, I don't work so much with children. Well, I don't work
No.
hardly at all with children. But it's good to kind of talk about that. Anyone else? Anything that you wanted to? I don't know if there's an opportunity to get questions from Facebook or YouTube, if there's any way. Um, I noticed somebody wrote that they'd heard about Daryl Davis. So that's great.
And there's one at the bottom of the chat right now.
Oh, is
Hi,
there?
Don.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So Brigitte is asking, what is the role of meditation, calming the mind, and dealing with difficult situations?
Ah, good, good. That's a good question. I haven't touched on it so much, but the way that I see it, again, our meditation practice is important in many, many ways. Obviously, in the grander scope of developing realizations and what have you, it's essential. But we're essentially trying to do two things in meditation. One is to stabilize our mind, which is what we did at the beginning of today, right? We work with the breath, single object, and we try to keep our awareness there, keep going back to the object, because that allows us to have some kind of duration to our attention and concentration. And that's an important skill to have. So, certainly, the degree to which we can work with any of these teachings depends to some degree on how focused we can be in our meditation. The second one is to do what we call kind of analysis of various things. And we can do analysis of a variety of things. Certainly in the Lam Ram, the stages of the path that we use as kind of our main format for engaging in the Buddha's teachings, we have many different topics that we can investigate. And I've touched on a few of them today: renunciation and the nature of samsara, the karma, pride and the other delusions and trying to reduce them, developing compassion and love for all beings. All of these are topics we can meditate on. And in fact, that is the way that we go about being most effective in our daily life in applying these things, as if we've done the work on the cushion. So when we sit down to meditate, it is important we have, some dedicated time every day, if possible, to sit down and reflect. We start with stabilizing meditation to make the mind less distracted, to kind of reduce some of that, noise that's going on all the time. You won't necessarily get rid of all of it, but at least you'll stop paying attention to it. That's the most important thing, is to not keep getting on those trains. Oh, here comes the train of, excitement about something going on later this week, and I'm just going to go fantasizing about everything that's going to be happening, and then you've lost the plot entirely, right? So the idea is to sit down and stabilize the mind to some degree. Then you introduce what it is you want to reflect on. Now, in the context of what we talked about today, it might be, again, an encounter you had with a difficult person earlier that day. So let's say it's later in the day and you're going, oh yeah, I'm kind of going to digest this and think about it so that I can have other ways to work with it should the situation arise again, which chances are it will. Just the nature of samsara, right? So you introduce that as what you're going to analyze. You're going to take a look at what transpired, kind of in that same way that we kind of did at the beginning of today. Look back at that difficult situation and what were the things that you thought, the things that you did, the emotions that you had. Kind of pick it apart. And what was the response that you had? How were you able to work with it? How were you able to embrace the unwanted to some degree at that moment? And maybe it wasn't so effective. Maybe we kind of, again, lost it and we ended up saying something that we regret. Okay, fine. Don't beat yourself up. Just acknowledge there's work to do. Right? So then you continue to apply whatever it is that you want to work with. I mean, again, I've given you a number of these things that you can work with. Find what works best for you or what might be complementing what you're studying in your own practice and what have you, what you're trying to work on. And then meditate on that again. Meditate on how this is the nature of samsara, to have difficult people, to have difficult situations, to experience suffering. Go back to the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. And this is what the Buddha started with. He used this word dukkha to refer to the unsatisfactory nature of our lives, that you're going to be confronting these sorts of things. And he said that first truth, the truth of dukkha, is to be understood. It is to be known. Well, can you meditate on that so that when things happen that are challenging in your lives, that's your first thought is, okay, uh, this is the nature of samsara. Why do I expect that I'm going to have freedom from all of this as long as I'm under the control of my karma and delusions? So you're not going to be so reactive at that time, right? So again, that's the role of meditation, is that you actually sit down and investigate the topics so that you can bring them into your awareness when you are off the cushion. Now, I might say a little further that in terms of these two types of meditation, it's not that then if that's all you have time for, you do the stabilizing and then you do the analysis of kind of what you're working on. And then hopefully you can maintain some awareness of that in your daily life. But the idea is if you get to a place where you really feel strongly that you've gotten the point of that meditation, you're really, yes, suffering is inevitable, suffering is a part of samsara. Well, then you go back to stabilizing, but you don't focus on the breath or some other object. You focus on that. Kind of deepen your awareness of that. You keep thinking to yourself the point of that meditation, of that reflection. Then you'll kind of bring it more deeply into your mind, and it'll be there when you need to draw on it, when you are out in your daily life and those difficult people do come in. But this is part of it, is again to be able to work on the cushion so that we are better skilled off the cushion, and then we learn from what we do off the cushion and we bring it back into our meditation. So if you're going to do a kind of a focused way of working on a particular difficult person in your life and changing your responses to them and so on, well, then you need to have some sort of meditation to assist with that. So hope that gives enough to work with. Yes. Yes, Maria, Gabriel.
Hi, thanks very much.
Mhm,
So, the method for dealing with it, you gave us a really good overview, but
mhm,
also you mentioned something called Ton Len.
mhm.
And is that something that you that I can look up and just do, or is that something I have to sort of plug into um,
Hmm,
the meditation center there in order to get taught it? Like, how does one
sure.
learn about that?
There are many resources for learning about Tonglen. Certainly at Lama Yeshe Ling, I'm sure they've got teachings that support, an understanding of that at times. It is taught in the context of the texts that we study. I mentioned this topic Lam Rim, which is a Tibetan phrase. It means Lam means path, and Rim means kind of graded, gradual or stages. And we often refer to it as the stages of the path. And it is usually taught there. One book that I might recommend that is from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, his book where he talks about Tonglen is called Ultimate Healing. That's
Oh,
in our
okay.
tradition, and he works with it there. And he actually works with a number of things around, the idea of healing through Tonglen. It is said that some people who've engaged in Tonglen through their compassionate wish to take on the suffering of others and to give them their happiness, that they've been able to effectively cure various ailments and things in their
Sure.
body. But
Yeah.
it's as it is a very powerful practice. It's used in the Lam Rim in the context of developing bodhicitta, in the context of trying to bring our minds to this place of wanting to benefit all beings. And of course, we have to have that wish to be willing to take on their suffering to accomplish that, and to give away our happiness. The person who I mentioned as well, Pema Chodron, she teaches extensively on Tonglen too, and her approach is a little more casual in a sense. I mean, it's not in the context of developing bodhicitta and so on, though it is. I mean, I'm not saying it's just a little, it's not quite as strictly laid out or something. This is the book that I was quoting earlier, Start Where You Are. And
Mm,
Sir Teachings on the 7-point mind training that I mentioned by Geshe Chikawa, which I've taught on. And she goes into Tonglen quite a bit in this, but I think Tonglen is in almost every one of her books. She has rather
mm,
extensive teachings, but she uses it as kind of like a daily practice, and that's
mhm,
useful too.
mhm,
Rinpoche, when he talks about it, he is talking about it more in the context of Lam Rim sometimes, but nonetheless, I always feel like I should point out where Rinpoche has taught it, since he is, was our spiritual director for so many years and really does
mhm.
have a lot of knowledge on this. But so yeah, that's where some resources, and I'm sure others at the center. Are you involved with the center there, then, Maria? No, no.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, you can certainly even just put in a Google search, probably, get some teachings on it.
Yeah. Can I ask you another
Mhm.
question before we
Sure.
go? I
Mhm.
don't mean to like ask like a big question before, but you
Sure.
can answer it anyway. No obligation, okay? But can you speak just a little bit to that space where um, we all want, I'm guessing all of us who are here are the converted. We're aiming to make this our practice with all we've got. And but sometimes, like in my case, what I'm trying to work with is I'm burnt out from giving
Mm.
a lot. I have to learn how to do it and maintain my own
Mhm.
maybe boundaries or integrity or something like
Sure,
that. I have to
sure.
stay intact. And I mean, I think you get my thing. So,
No,
like,
and
could you speak at all to that space or that place
sure.
where there's a corner where maybe
Mhm.
something changes so that
Mhm.
we can give and maintain our intactness?
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up a kind of a big topic that's hard to
Yeah,
condense into a
I
short
know.
answer.
Just a
But
clue, a little clue
but
or something. I'll look up Conland because
yeah.
maybe it's in there.
Yeah. No, and again, I think you probably, although you're feeling somewhat burnt out, I'm guessing you already have a lot of skills and abilities to be able to continue doing what you're doing, that you still have
Yeah,
that
you never
interest.
know what
But
happens tomorrow.
one thing that came to mind when you were talking was the importance of self-compassion, and this is a big topic as well in Western psychology as well as in Buddhism, you know, we tend to think that being a compassionate person means taking care of others. And that is a part of it, absolutely. But it has to start with ourselves. There's a lot of work on self-compassion that this wonderful researcher, Kristen Neff, she's written a whole book on self-compassion. And I'm just going to point out real quickly what she
Really?
calls like a self-compassion break, which is, first of all, to have the thought that what I'm going through right now is difficult, to just like really be able to accept that. And this may be advice for you, Maria, but it's also advice for any of us when we're going through challenging times, to kind of acknowledge our own suffering, you know, to be able to kind of hold the awareness of that. Secondly, to understand that that is part of our shared humanity, that it is actually not something that is just unique to us. That gives us a little bit of space around it and also keeps it from being too self-centered. Self-compassion isn't self-centered. It's really meant to be getting in touch with our own hurt, our own challenges, our own frustrations, so we can then be more adept at helping others. The third part of it, after seeing it as part of our shared humanity, is to do something that is nurturing for us. And it can be just simply sitting in quiet space and kind of giving affirmations to ourselves that are different than the language we often give ourselves. She points out that if we monitored our self-language, because we are pretty hard on ourselves, we probably will come to the conclusion that if we use those same words towards others, we probably wouldn't have any friends at all. We tend to be really rude to ourselves. We say things to ourselves that are incredibly unkind. We have to change that language, and we have to be able to speak gently and kindly towards ourselves in ways that embrace our vulnerability, our suffering. So those are the three steps. Acknowledge that what you're going through is hard, that it's suffering, see it as part of shared humanity, and then do something that is being kind to yourself, that is really taking care of yourself at the moment. She says, like, put your hand on your heart, or maybe embrace yourself with your arms, and then just have these thoughts of, you know, may you be free from this. May you find all of what you need to go through life with strength and skill and peace and whatever. I mean, do whatever works for you. You can come up with your own language, but make it language that is opposite to the way that we tend to be so hard on ourselves. That's what came to mind to me, and I don't know if it's hitting the nail on the head
Oh,
or
that's really
not,
good. Like
but
Buddhists are so organized. This great, like 1, 2, 3, here we go. It's
you
really
could,
handy. I could keep
if
track of it and think
yeah,
it clearly. But also,
uh,
um, I just thank you for it. It's
oh,
very good,
sure,
very
sure,
fulfilling and very
okay.
good. I
Well,
coming here was my act of doing something nurturing.
good, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So again, if you're interested in her work, she does have, I think, selfcompassion.org or something is the name of her
Oh,
website.
what? But how do you spell
Her
Kristen Neff? Like, there's a
K
lot of ways. K?
Kristin, I believe. It could
Oh,
be En, but the most important thing is her last name. It's Neff, Neff. And
oh,
if you
good.
put in a
Okay.
search with that, you'll get her website. And she has what's, again, what I gave to you was what's called a self-compassion break. It's just like anytime you're going through a tough time and you just want to nurture yourself. There it is. It's in the chat box now.
Super.
So
Okay.
self-compassion is her book, but she's got a website. And again, it's just an opportunity to get back to that place of nurturing and taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, it's a journey. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you. I wish you well, Maria, and
Thank
all
you.
of you. I wish well. I don't know if we have time for more questions because we're already at 9:40. Um, but
We're
yeah,
fine,
thank you.
Don, as long as you
Yes.
want to go.
Oh, as long as I want to go. Okay.
It's
Well,
as
I'm
you wish.
fine. I'm fine. I just don't. I mean, sometimes I just get really sensitive around them, and I'm horrible. I go overtime all the time. I don't think
Well,
that I've done
And
a single.
we do regularly as well. We
Okay.
yeah, in our Sundays we often have questions that go up into an hour after.
Yeah.
A lot of
Well,
discussion.
if any of you have additional questions that you'd like to ask, then
Uh,
certainly.
so there are no questions coming through social media. We have
Or
14,
comments. I mean,
about
comments are
14
fine
people.
too if somebody wants to
I,
share something.
yeah, I'm so grateful for the emphasis on pride,
Mm,
because I recognize, okay, that's where I'm falling over. That's where I'm throwing up. I'm
mm,
protecting myself unnecessarily because I think, okay, I've got tools. I can do this, but then I'm being reactive rather than recognizing
mm.
my humility here. So thank you so much for that.
Mm.
The other question, I mean, maybe I have some answers myself, but I'd like to ask you because I'm acknowledging your wisdom and the thought you put into this.
Mm.
So I imagined as you're speaking, somebody who's being wielded by a delusion, so
Mhm.
the metaphor of the stick. And then, okay, so I want to, so I'm doing Tonglen, so I want to offer them something. So that, so what is it that they actually need? What is it that what do I visualize, or what can I identify as being wish fulfilling to them when they're um, being overwhelmed by a delusion?
Mhm. I think it can be a variety of things, Dave. I mean, Pema Chodron sometimes she uses the idea in one of her teachings on Tonglen is sometimes it's just good to give them a good cup of coffee, or something, you know, like you just think just what would be like in the moment, what might be something nice that you could just give them. But the idea is that we always want to be aiming beyond just more temporal bits of peace and satisfaction or whatever. Those things are fine and they do contribute to our welfare, our happiness, but they're not the final result we're aiming for. I mean, oftentimes when I teach on Tonglen and just the manner of how we go about this process of giving to that person, and it can be whoever we're working with, a difficult person or a friend or whoever that we are as the object of our practice of Tonglen, is that we start to give them things that create more space in their life for deeper um, kind of looking for meaning. There's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs that most of us are familiar with right now. That you do have to start with just the stuff that makes people comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm going to give you, a comfortable job and a comfortable situation so that you actually have the bare bones stuff that you need to survive in this world and to not be constantly stressed. And then I'm going to give you things like friends and people in your life that are important to you that actually contribute to your well-being and create more ability to connect with others and what have you. And then I'm going to give you teachers and people who can help you to, actualize yourself at a deeper level, kind of go up that hierarchy of needs, if you will. And of course, in Buddhism, we're always wanting to bring people to the final fulfillment of their potential. So it can become sending them the Dharma, the gurus, all the beings that they need in order to beings and objects that they need in order to achieve that state of potential. So the idea is that when we kind of start thinking long term and bigger, we start with maybe what's small in the moment. So like if say you have somebody who is accosting you about a particular thing that's going on that they're reacting to, that maybe they see you as a part of, well, maybe you give them freedom from that situation in the moment. You give them an opportunity to just find some peace, but then you want to deepen that peace so that they can attain something much greater. So that's the idea behind it, is that in your own imagination, you send out what you think might be beneficial. We don't know for sure, but we know that certainly in the long term, things like the Dharma and spiritual teachings and spiritual teachers are going to be a benefit to them. We can think about them receiving that and being happy to have those in their lives. But the idea is, once more, back on this Tonglen, I may not have made it as clear either, and it's not because of what Dave's question. I'm just saying in terms of just going back, when you transform all this into light and send it out to that being, it becomes whatever they need. And so we don't necessarily always have to think about more specific things, but I think it is useful to put it in those categories of first things that create a more temporal in the moment state of well-being, and those things that help beings to attain a more ultimate welfare, because that's what we ideally want for them, is to kind of go beyond this conditioned world where everything is fleeting and transitory into a place where they have a more lasting and deep peace. So
Thank you for that list because I tend to just go for the essence and don't think about more practical things, and so that's helpful actually. All of giving all of what they need, but going to the essence, because that's where I was trying to, like, how do you give expression in words to what it is that probably all of us are really seeking
um,
ultimately.
I guess, yeah. I mean, in words, I'm not, I mean, can certainly talk about what that state is, but maybe it's just more of, again, through our own imagination, thinking of them in that place. mean, if we talk about the goal, once more, of Buddhahood, is where all of what disturbs the mind, all of what obscures the mind is completely gone, and they're completely free of all of that. And all of what complements our existence and our way of being in a more honest and truthful and wise way is fully developed. All of our compassion, our love, what have you. So this is really kind of what we want for others. And so it might not, the words are not as important as the thoughts in many ways, like just to have the thought of this being in that state, bringing them all the way to that culmination of the essence, the complete development of their mind, of that complete freedom from all that obscures and the complete development of everything that complements. I don't know. Does that make sense? I'm not sure that I'm getting to the answer of your question.
That helps. Yeah. Again, it brings me to a state of humility, thinking, okay, I don't know what it is that they need. And so
Yeah.
I have to, yeah, visualizing them as fully actualized in whatever
Yeah.
expression that takes for them. I think that maybe that's, yeah,
I mean, yeah, I think that's fine. I think that that gets at it. And maybe again, the humility that we all do still need to have because we don't even know. We're not there. I'm not there yet, certainly. Maybe all of you are Buddhas already, but I'm not. So I can have that kind of just not knowing and be okay with just, as you said, wishing for them to achieve whatever that looks like. But we have an idea. I mean, I think we've had little glimpses of it, perhaps in our practice, where we've had that space of kind of some peace, some freedom from what's troubling and plaguing our minds, and some, enhancement of our kindness and compassion towards others or whatever. So I don't
right.
know.
So it'd be like whatever we've discovered that is most precious to us in our minds, we can offer that and see
Yeah,
if they'll accept that.
yeah, and go beyond that to think of whatever that's the seed of the full fruition of that. You know.
Mm, mm,
Mm.
mm, mm.
Thanks for that, though, Dave. Yeah. Any final things and anyone needed to say or ask? So again, I would encourage you to work with whatever you take away with from today. Kind of work with some kernel of it. Maybe even think for after we conclude the teaching, you might sit down and say, okay, this is what I'd like to focus on, because it's a lot of different things, right? A lot of different ideas, and some of them may be more salient than others. And so just say, okay, this is what I'd like to work on. And I know we all have busy lives and we all have other practices and things that we do, but just to try to kind of take the teachings and bring them to life in your own way, meditating on them to some degree so that you can become familiar with that idea, and then trying to bring it to bear in those situations where you're with difficult people. So anyway, let's do just a short dedication. Thank you all for being here, but let me put on the screen a couple of dedication prayers and from our tradition. This first one where we are wishing for ourselves to attain that fully actualized state, the state of a Buddha, so we then can help others to do the same work to get there as well, so we can all be in Buddhahood together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then this wonderful prayer about bodhicitta, which is essentially, again, the mind we were cultivating at the beginning of today, the wish to benefit others in this way, become enlightened for their sake. May that mind grow and develop and never decline. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then on the next screen, we've got at the top, the prayer for His Holiness's wishes to be fulfilled. And we can think about as we recite this for him and all of our spiritual guides who are still with us, to have good health, long lives, to continue to do the work that they do so we and others can benefit from their presence. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, we beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And there is the prayer for the swift return of Rinpoche, but we've heard, as we mentioned earlier, that Rinpoche is back, and we don't know the location of his reincarnation, but let's just make strong prayers that all be auspicious for finding his reincarnation very quickly, and for us to be able to, again, have everything kind of play out in the most auspicious way for Rinpoche and other spiritual guides to continue to help us on our path. We need their guidance so badly, so we just make that strong request. Then we can also dedicate for beings in our lives. And you might even think about the difficult people in your life and kind of dedicating for them personally. And some of us do have regular people who annoy us, who bother us in work and their families or what have you. And think about dedicating for them as well as for others in your life who might be experiencing difficulties, problems, illness, death, those who might have died that you know. Send that positive energy out to them in the similar way that we do in Tonglen, so that they receive the benefits of what we've done here today, kind of giving it away to them. And then may all beings receive all benefits, be free from all suffering, and achieve perfect happiness through what we've done here together today. So again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk with all of you about this topic today, and thank you again, Manoshi, Dave, everyone at Lama Yeshe Ling, for this chance to spend some precious time with all of you. So I wish you all well in your practice and hope to see you all again very soon. Thanks so much.